just so you know, recording and that's never happened to me before.
Yeah, it's been happening.
Okay, so he should be here. He is. Great. So while David is getting himself settled in, we just started talking about how much of the show people have seen. So maybe I have you all in gallery view. Can you just give a show of hands if you've seen all 3 seasons? By the way, those who are not showing your faces, it's okay. Really, it's fine, but it'd be great. We want this to be a conversation, so definitely try to interact, get involved as best you can. Okay, so it seems like most people have seen all of it, and I'm going to assume that. So there will be spoilers. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's no way we can talk about this show without talking about the end of the 3rd season.
Absolutely.
Because I think that half of you want to talk about that, and there are a couple of questions that immediately come to mind. So we're going to do that. Anyway, David Daniel is with us, rabbinic pastor.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
So I'm sure most of you remember him. He was an integral part of our community in so many ways, and still is, and has been joining us on Zoom for services, etc., even though he no longer lives locally.
So we get rid of
What is local now, anyway? By the way, I'm leaving everyone unmuted so that you can join in the conversation whenever you want. But that also means, please, if your phone rings, mute yourself, or if you need to talk to someone else in the room, do that. All right. So I have found this to be a fascinating show, extremely helpful as a Jewish educator and as a rabbi, and also personally has helped me give me a window to the ultra-Orthodox community and to Israeli life as well. I think it's extremely melodramatic. Also, as art, there are some amazing things about it, but also, just like any 1-hour-long drama, it's trying to fit a lot of things into a compressed time frame. But we don't need to be television critics here tonight. I think we want to look at it from the Jewish angle, from the personal angle, from the growth angle, the values angle, and so let's go with that. David, do you want to start with? You want to have any initial comments to begin?
Well, I think that, as Rabbi Hemmer and I were talking earlier, the show is fascinating because of the opposites that it engenders in discussion. What about them is most like us? What about them is least like us? What's the overlap? What do we like most about the show? What do we like least about the show? What's the relationship between those two? And I think that's part of what makes the show so fascinating for liberal Jews is there's, there's a certain amount of Jewish overlap, as well as obviously a substantial amount of non-overlap. And there's a certain amount of human overlap that transcends Judaism at all. So that's kind of my introductory comment about it.
And that's a great way to begin. When they came in 2019, after the first 2 seasons were shown on Netflix, before COVID, the cast appeared at Temple Emmanuel, the Skirball Center in New York, where they have tremendous adult education. And they were lined up, people were lined up around the block to get in to see them. And one of the comments that was made was that if you looked at this group of people, there were no payas in sight. There were very few yarmulkes in sight, perhaps none, which tells you a lot. It wasn't Orthodox Jews, although many Orthodox Jews have watched and enjoyed the show. Even Haredi Jews have had generally positive feelings about the show that have watched it. But also non-Jews. And there's a Facebook site that sort of talking about Shtisel that includes a lot of questions from non-Jews, because it just has really become almost a phenomenon. the Netflix show Unorthodox, which also features Shira Haas, became an extraordinary phenomenon this past year, and I think they're sort of feeding off of each other, although they have very different messages. She's incredible in both programs. All right, so let's start with a question that maybe even is before the question of how are they most like us and most unlike us. When I hear,
yes. What about dinner?
Sorry, Sherry, can you mute yourself? When I hear Shtisel, it's sort of word association. Fill in the blank. When I hear Shtisel, I blank.
I love it.
So you feel tingly all over.
Well, not quite.
Okay. So Laura, what about it? Really, what attracted you to it?
Well, I have to say, I also watched Surrogate on Amazon. And
Surrogate was terrific.
I love looking in, and they're very, very different.
I watched that years ago, by the way. Yes,
yeah,
it is different.
Looking into that window of the ultra-Orthodox is fascinating, upsetting, sometimes makes me sad, sometimes make a little jealous. There are all different feelings associated with that community.
Yes. It's Surrogate. Raise your hand if you've seen Surrogate, if you've watched, because it's worth it. It's really worth it.
Awesome. Yeah.
Both Surrogate and Shtisel have famous Israeli actors. In fact, one of them is on both. Do you know?
Yes.
Laura, do you know who it is?
It was one of the women, wasn't it?
No,
Perhaps.
I don't know. Good
it
guess.
was the boyfriend of one of the women in the little group. And
Okay.
he was a professor, right?
Oh,
Right.
And then it dawned on me that he was also married to the woman who's sitting to your left, Rabbi, in the green cardigan. It was her husband who left her and went to somewhere in South America, claiming he was working for a butcher or something. It dawned on me because the difference between Surrogate and Shtisel is Shtisel, they're ultra Orthodox. In Surrogate, they're observant, but they're not, they're not over.
So
How do you spell Surrogate?
What does Surrogate mean?
How do you spell
Surrogate
it?
with a samech? No. Surugim.
Isn't
So
that the
it means knitted
yarmulke?
yarmulkes, right?
Right.
So anyway, Zohar Strauss is the actor who plays Lipa in Shtisel, the husband who needs to do teshuvah really badly, and does in the end. And he plays the secular archaeologist boyfriend of Hodaya in Surrogate. So totally different roles. But Zohar Strauss is a major Israeli actor. If you've seen, I believe, the movie Beaufort and Lebanon, there were several internationally acclaimed Israeli movies that he has been in. You turn around, he's everywhere, as is Nati in Surrogate. You'll see him in a lot of movies too. So
Nati.
and Gitti Netta Reskin is, of course, amazing. These are big league actors. I mean, the most, Shira Haas, who won international awards as Ruchami. She's Ruchami in Shtisel, and she also plays in Unorthodox, Esti, the maiden character there. Mm-hmm. And she's on the way to playing Golda Meir in her next movie.
Oh.
That is gonna. How don't I guess the young Golda Meir, the very young Golda Meir. How she's gonna pull that off? Anyway, so they are major actors. But it was an important point that someone made, that they're very different. We think of Orthodoxy and we lump it all together, and that's really important for us to understand. And Shtisel helps us to understand it, that there are many different groups within Orthodoxy. And for instance, the modern Orthodox of Surrogate are, that they basically are very modern, integrated into Israel, Zionists, who also have the same interpersonal problems that everyone else has. The Haredim of Shtisel are the same in terms of their interpersonal issues, but they are from the fairly strictly Orthodox, non-Hasidic segment of Israeli society, but not all the way strictly Orthodox, so that they have cell phones. You can see some of them are regulated so that they can't really see a lot on their cell phones, but they find a way to do it anyway. And they don't go in the army, which is a major difference. So they just are very different, but they are not Hasidic. So that's another thing. In fact, in I think season 2, there's a Chabad member of the family, and they sort of look down on that person. Mm-hmm. So anyway, the Surrogate Shtisel difference is important to mention. All right, so thank you, Laura. So you think,
Josh, could you explain that again?
Go ahead,
you just said that they're not Hasidic. What are they that differentiates them from being Hasidic?
Well, if you were a Jew living in the 19th century or the 18th century, and you lived in Eastern Europe in the Shtetl, the Pale of Settlement, as it was called, which was Poland, Russia, etc. I mean, all the borders kept shifting. There were two main groups. There were other groups too. There were Zionists, there were secularists, Haskalah, philosophers, etc. Those are the secularists. But the two main traditional Jewish groups were the Hasidim, who started with the Baal Shem Tov, and they were sort of the outsiders based on Jewish mysticism, and David can definitely tell you a lot more about Hasidism than I can. But they were non-intellectuals, although that's changed. They tended to be sort of based on prayer, dancing, singing, spirituality, as opposed to the Mitnagdim, and also their leadership was inherited from the Rebbes, from father to son, starting with the Baal Shem Tov in the 1700s. So the Mitnagdim, who were, the name literally means opposed to, because they were opposed to the Hasidim, but they were the intellectual elite. And they based their leadership entirely on scholarship, the study of Torah, lived very strictly also. And so they tended to congregate in areas like Lithuania. Vilna was a major center. And the Hasidim tended to be in Galicia, in Poland, and that area, where some of our groups have gone, in southern Poland, eastern Poland, Belarus, etc. So anyway, they're very different in their focus. One is more intellectual, just to be very simplistic. One is more intellectual, and the other is more spiritual. It's not really fair, but anyway, David, would you say that that's sort of the line that you draw?
Yeah, I think the Hasidim started as a rebellion against what was seen as this hyper-intellectualism that people were experiencing with people studying Talmud, and that being, as the rabbi said, sort of the only criterion by which worth was measured in the Jewish community. And the Baal Shem Tov was much more about the emotion of it, feeling close to God and having an ecstatic experience, which was not the goal of the Mitnagdim. So that's what I'd say.
Right, and as is normally the case, because these are relatively minor in the whole scheme of things. They all accept the Torah. Their prayer book is basically the same. There are some minor differences. There is a certain belief system that's very different. Hasidim tend to be more mystical and tend to be focused on messianism, on the Messiah, and feeling that our deeds can bring about the messianic age. The intellectuals, the Mitnagdim, tend, and I sort of follow along in a way in their way of looking at things, that we shouldn't focus on messianism because that can be very dangerous. But other than that, they have Shabbat. They all observe kashrut. They're all Jewish by definition. And what's really important to note is that some of the ethical questions that come into play in season 3, there's general consensus around them. And I'm going to throw a few out because I think it surprised a lot of people. how Jews deal with abortion.
Mm-hmm.
In season 3, spoiler alert, it's brought up, it's talked about, and it's talked about as a viable option. Does anyone remember what the criteria for allowing abortion primarily is?
The mother's
Save the life.
the life of the mother.
Exactly. Saving the life of the mother. The mother's life comes first. The child unborn is not yet a human being. And that wasn't discussed in great detail, but because they assumed that an Israeli audience, this was originally intended for, would know some of these things. So let's say an evangelical watching and thinking, well, these Orthodox Jews are, they're also to the right socially, and they're probably going to agree with us on a lot of things. They would be surprised at Judaism's very liberal approach to abortion. Okay, and go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, of all the incredibly touching moments in season 3, you might remember that was a particularly moving moment for us as Yosale was consulting with his rabbi at a extremely sensitive moment in their lives. You can imagine that was particularly moving for us, and you might remember a conversation we had, Rabbi, and it was this season brought so much together that if I had to use one word to describe the series, it would be love. And the writing was so nuanced and so layered for each of the characters, but there was an underlying love that you felt in the more secular characters, the Haredi characters. It was so incredibly well put together. And season 3, I felt particularly we felt that more than ever before.
It was beautiful. It was really very sensitive. And so some of the, aside from abortion, and thank you for sharing that, Evan. There was a lot of discussion, of course, of surrogate parenthood, parenting, and mental illness on a few levels, but with Racheli, and people don't always come off looking that great, including Shtisel, who Shalom, the main character, who makes every mistake in the parenting book, and several times over with Akiva, poor kid, 30 years old, poor kid. But the whole mental illness question is dealt with very sensitively, and the surrogate parenting. My sister, though many of you know, was unable to have a child on her own, and she and her husband were pretty much instructed by their rabbi that they had to find a way to have a child, and using technology is not a problem. Right. And this is, and so they did go through this surrogate method, and the child is 16 years old today. She's great. My sister carried the child at age 53, I believe. And children are Israel's most precious natural resource. So it was relatively inexpensive. It was actually a lot cheaper than it seemed in the show that it would have been to pay for it all. It's just an amazing thing. So you see that again, and again, it's very progressive, surprisingly progressive in terms of the social values. Also, the society cares for people. Of course, they have national medicine. There was an incredible incident involving that, where Shtisel tries to, make an appointment, and of course, he's feeling like he's having a heart attack, and they said, all right, 2 months from now, we can get you an appointment. But he's able to, finagle the system, because that's what they do, and complain, which is also what they do. And then he complains so much that the operator on the other side starts crying. Right. It's one of the most incredible scenes. And, because she had lost her husband, he had lost his wife, and they bonded. And then she got him an appointment for the next day, and I was sure that he was going to meet up with her at some point. It didn't happen, but maybe in season 4.
Season 4.
Yeah, definitely. So,
How would they balance
some of these things? Yeah. Who wants
how
to
would they
speak?
balance the ethics of like Shulam? He was such a religious man and studied the Torah all consistently, but yet his ethics and his outward ethics are suspect.
Yeah, I mean, he's a flawed character. There's no question about that. I mean, but he's also sort of like Tevye. I saw a lot of Tevye in him, and it almost seemed intentional, because he comes up with these pithy sayings. He doesn't pray to God in the same way that Tevye does. Dear Lord, he doesn't do that. But he makes the same mistakes, in not wanting his son to be happy with the person he's chosen to fall in love with. Yes, Evan.
I think it's fascinating that his rigidity was clearly passed on to Akiva's siblings, where Akiva is obviously very, very different, but the sibling rigidity plays out throughout, especially in season 3, fascinatingly, and how it's broken by their significant others. The husband and the wife broke this rigidity in such wonderful ways. Of course, with driving.
Yes.
The whole women's, that's another social thing.
Yes, women empowerment.
They're not too progressive on women, but they do drive and they work. The women are the ones who work.
It was beautifully put together how the heroic individual was able to confront the rigidity in the community. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so how did he get locked in the car? I mean, really? He had a cell phone. He didn't bring his cell phone that day.
He fell asleep.
No, I know that, but you open the door.
I was shocked when he and his brother were fighting.
On the floor.
On the floor.
Yes. In fact, his brother is Nachum, was played by Sasson Gabay, who played. A lot of you saw The Band's Visit. In the movie The Band's Visit, he was the Egyptian band leader. He was the star.
Oh, that's why you look familiar.
He's been in a lot of Israeli movies. He's another famous actor, and he has this perfect look. And if there's anyone on the show who's a bad guy, he's as close as you came to it. I mean,
he's pretty reprehensible.
Yeah. Trying to, trying to cheat your fiance out of her earnings and make a deal on the side with your brother to corrupt him, to steal her. It's just like crazy. But and also the whole thing with his daughter. And the question of whether they would be allowed to be married as cousins.
My mother would have called him a ganef.
Yeah. All right. So, which of the women would you say is the best match for Akiva? Elisheva, season 1, Libby in season 2, or Racheli in season 3?
Like Libby.
I think it's Libby.
She was his soulmate.
I think Libby, definitely.
I agree.
Well, she's the one he paints.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They never say what happened to her, why she died.
Tell you.
Yeah. I mean, there are hints. Well, first of all, we don't know she's dead at the beginning of the first episode of the 3rd season, and that is such a shock at the end. But there are hints, because you never see her hold the baby, and you also see her saying, I really miss breastfeeding, and there's no way that baby is too old to be breastfed at that point. And he moves in with his father without her. There are just a whole bunch of clues, but it seems like it was an illness. But then there are some who have suggested that there was a car accident. So, but that actually might have killed her mother too.
Didn't she say she wasn't healthy? Didn't she have some health problems, or was it emotional health?
No, there was something about that. But her mother is also, is her mother alive in season 2? Nahum's wife, because he's mourning both of them.
He's mourning, I think.
He's mourning both of them. So it's probably an illness, but it could have been childbirth. Although
I was thinking that.
Yeah, she might.
No, because she wouldn't say she missed breastfeeding, because that implies that she did it for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it seemed to me that he really loved the one that was older than he.
That was the first
one. Yeah,
the first one.
Well, who wouldn't love Superman's mother? Ayelet Sur is I said all these other people were famous. She's the most famous actress of all the ones in the show.
Oh.
And she's been in some of the Dan Brown movies. She was in, I think, one of them. I'm trying to remember. But she's definitely been in like action movies here.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Who are we talking about?
Elisheva.
The first one.
That's who we know. Yeah, Elisheva.
Right.
Okay. And I think she was great for him too. It sort of got him off of being conventional, and the fact that he knew enough not to marry the first. I don't know if you remember back to the first season, but she manipulated him by crying. Yes. And so he proposed because he didn't want her to cry. And then he found out that that's how she always gets her way from her father, and broke it off. But he knew well enough.
Yes. There was a very interesting thing with the appearance of the ghosts with Elisheva's 2 husbands, and then later with Kiva's wife, that she appears to him all the time. And then there was that towards the end, the final scene, when they have all the ghosts appear, they all come together.
All right, so
and
tune out if you
I don't understand the point. I never didn't understand the point of it, because I don't know. My grandfather, my father's father, he was a Misnagimish Jew. He wasn't a Chassid, but there was no belief in talking to ghosts or anything like that. That was totally beyond him. So I don't know why that was introduced. Maybe you have an idea, or maybe David Daniel has an idea of why they had those ghost characters.
Well, David, do you want to chime in first?
No, I don't have an idea.
Okay, I have an idea. All right. At the end, first of all, I don't think it's about talking to ghosts. I think it's about the presence of the dead being with us all the time, and influencing our lives and being part of our lives. And in a sense, with Libby, it was, he could not get beyond her. He needed her permission to move on. His mother in the first season comes back a lot, Devorah, the original Devorah, not Devorah the baby. And so you see that a lot. And you definitely see it in the first season with Elisheva and her past husbands who have died. And this burden but I think we all live with it. So at the end, there's a quote, and I thought it was beautiful the way they presented the quote from Isaac Bashevis Singer. Because they're discussing this quote, this Jewish author, the Apikoros. Isaac Bashevis Singer. I don't know that anyone in the Haredi world would read Isaac Bashevis Singer, but they found a way to get it in there, and it is: the dead don't go anywhere; they're all here. Every man is a cemetery. All our grandmothers and grandfathers. An actual cemetery in whom lie all our grandmothers and grandfathers. The father and mother, the wife, the child, everyone is here all the time. And so they're all gathering around, but they're in a very peaceful way. I think it's just an amazing idea that we, in each of us, is every generation that has come before us.
Right.
And
I like that.
But there is the notion that only 3 or 4 generations will remember us, hence he's going beyond that. Because actually in that scene, I don't think that many people have died in the show that they could fill a room like those. I was trying to pick people out. There was the grandmother, the one who watched soap operas.
Oh, I loved her.
who is a great, really funny character.
Too bad they killed her off. She was really terrific. She, it's just a whole other thing about her relationship with the Rebbitzin and with her children, and she was a good character study all by herself without the other people.
Yes. By the way, Sherry put into the chat, why would ultra-Orthodox be opposed to surrogacy? Absolutely, they are not opposed to it. That's really the point, that they are willing to use science, especially in Israel, where everything is kosher, where all the doctors are Jewish, and the surrogates, to a degree, are probably Jewish as well. And that's another point to make in terms of the progressive values. Science-based. One of the Shiras is a scientist. Right. I thought that was interesting. In the last season, the two girlfriends, the two Shiras, the one who is, by the way, a model. Oh, yeah. All of these actors are secular. But anyway, so she was in Fauda. Oh, anyone watch Fauda? Mm-hmm. This is like the 6 degrees of separation. Do you recognize her from Fauda?
Yes. Yeah.
Current season? Okay.
Kidnap victim.
She was the kidnap victim.
Yeah.
Right.
Just the last thing, that last scene in the kitchen, I thought that was so incredibly moving in that they brought together that concept where there's a very fine line between having the blessings of all of the memories of our loved ones who have passed and being cursed by not being able to move on. And Shulam was a classic example of not of potentially passing that along. And Akiva was fighting this and trying to be able to move on. Of course, things move very quickly. No one would expect him to move on within a year of his wife's passing. But as you said, for dramatic purposes, this concept was put together, I felt, in that kitchen scene with them all present with him. And that is who was with him, all passed on.
And as you said, love conquers all. Even the tremendous enmity that was developed between the three of them during the last season, it's all, it's all gone over a little, glass of tea. They're always drinking.
Yes.
And eating.
Yeah. That's right.
But but the idea, you're right, you're totally right, Evan. I just think that there's just so much, on the deepest human level, so much forgiveness going on, so much love, and so much connection that transcends the generation, that definitely transcends life and death. One other little sidelight, many of you knew Pamela Cohn Allen, and a lot of scenes take place at the cemetery, not Mount of Olives, which is the big cemetery, the traditional one, but it's the cemetery on Givat Shaul. Right as you enter Jerusalem, if you're driving up to Jerusalem, you'll there are curves. The last curve says "Welcome to Jerusalem" or some big sign there. And you look straight up almost, you will see this enormous cemetery. And that's where Pamela is buried. In fact, the view, and, it's just very personal because I was there at her burial. The view is the same view that her grave has. And you see a lot of funeral practices in this show too, a lot of life cycle practices, wedding preparations, lots of simchas.
The most
not a lot of Shabbats though.
The most interesting also was the courting. The courting scenes and the way they go to this place. All
right, so who knows which place that is?
Oh, I don't know.
Sari, Jaffe, I'm looking at you.
It's some hotel, right, that we were at?
Yes, it is. It is the David Citadel Hotel.
Oh, okay.
And that's right near the Mamilla Mall, that incredible mall you walk through to get to Jaffa Gate. It's one of the big, in fact, I believe Blinken was there today. I was watching his news conference. We're not going to get into news, but I think he was meeting. He might have been meeting with Bibi there. I don't know, but you see the outside and you immediately recognize it, but the inside, the lobby. I mean, Mara and I spent a lot of time in that lobby because we just like to hang out in lobbies of Israeli hotels, and you see, yeah, it sounds weird, I know, but you see all of these dramas playing out, all these couples coming together, and you know it's the first time they've met each other, and they're probably going to be married a week from Sunday. Actually, Tuesday night. That's the lucky day. But
I think it happens at the hotel here in Stamford also on summer Sundays.
Oh, yes.
Hey, we've got our Orthodox here too. At the march yesterday, they were wrapping tefillin on everyone as they were walking by.
Oh yeah. Not me.
But the courting rituals, that's one, as David was saying at the beginning, that's one way they are sort of different, or are they? There's a lot of J-date in how this matchmaker is working things out. It's very mechanized. They have their computer lists. They match people together. They want to make a good match. And one of the problems in this year's episodes was that prejudice came through against Sephardic Jews, Ashkenazi Sephardi. It still exists, even in the ultra-Orthodox community. Again, people think they're all alike. They're not all alike. So that was an important thing.
Okay. Can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Barbara. How are you? You're on the air.
My two questions, actually. I don't know how you put the label of Haredi, because my understanding is that they're really way out. Very strict rules that don't make sense. So I found them trying to be a little bit on the modern side.
Yeah.
And what did Akiva's wife die from? Just childbirth, or?
We don't know.
We were wondering before you came on. Probably an illness after childbirth. That's what we're thinking. So, good question about Haredim. Haredi means to tremble. It comes from biblical sources, and the idea is that people who are pious excessively, or intensely pious, I should say, tremble. There's sort of a shake, like when you pray, you daven like that.
Right.
And you make a really good point, and I did want to mention this. Haredi life seems very normal and very accessible to us in Shtisel. But if you listen to Sholem Dean, who came to Bethel a few years ago, who's written about his escape from the Satmar community of Rockland County, and how impossible. He lost contact with his kids. He was never able to reestablish that. He was basically excommunicated and left without skills. He had no skills. And you see that, and you realize that we're not seeing the whole picture.
Right.
If you look, and then you watch Unorthodox, and how Shira Haas in her role needs to get away. And then you see in Shtisel too, these kids' lives are arranged for them. Now maybe that's good, I don't know, because some of the marriages are stable, but in other cases they're loveless and very sad. And you have people like Lippe, who then succumbs to infidelity and goes off to South America and spends the rest of the series feeling guilty. But I think he just felt a need to get away.
Rabbi,
yes,
do we have any sense about how the Christian community viewed this series?
He didn't watch it.
I think they like it.
Yeah?
They're doing an American version, right? I don't know when it's coming out, but they're doing an English American. It's being produced in the United States. I don't know if it's going to follow the storyline exactly, but it's going to be based on the same kind of familial issues.
By the way, just back to Barbara's question, if you look at Israeli elections, which I won't too much, There are two major Haredi parties. There are other smaller ultra-Orthodox or Orthodox parties, but Shas is Sephardic Jews, and then there's the Torah sages basically have a party of Haredi Ashkenazi Jews, and they do not mix. Their voters don't vote for each other's parties. So there's very clearly a line between them all.
And Rabbi, when we saw in the season all the young men just sitting and studying Torah, and that is a situation here. In New York, I remember that the yeshivas were not accredited, that people came out of them and complained. The ex-students are the ones who made the complaint that they graduated and, they basically couldn't do math or they couldn't read well enough. Right. They had no skills.
It still goes on, I think.
And the government pays for it and pays them as adults to continue studying because according to the Haredim, and the government buys it because they have the balance of power, and able to form governments, their praying is what keeps Israel alive. Their studying is what keeps Israel alive. So they're doing their part while the army does its part. Meanwhile, most of them don't go into the army.
Right.
And it creates a terrible imbalance in Israeli society. You have 10% of Israelis who are Haredi, ultra-Orthodox. You have 20% who are Arabs. And we've seen in the last few weeks just how fragile Israeli society. They all have different school systems. Mm-hmm. And within the Orthodox community, there's another school system. The secular also have their own. There are basically 4 or 5 different school systems in Israel. Public schools. The government pays for all of it, but the curriculum is not well regulated, well managed. They don't get a lot of science. So while they do believe in science and technology, or they utilize it to have babies and et cetera, it's very scary, and that needs to change, I think. If you notice that there's an antagonism toward the Zionists,
yes,
that you often hear from, especially Sholom's brother, and Nochem, the Zionists. But even in the first season, I'm sorry I'm spouting like this. I love the show. Do you remember the scene where Akiva, it was Nochem, actually. No, it was Sholom who shows his students the flyover on Independence Day.
Yeah, that's
right. Yeah.
Which they're not allowed to show.
I'm hard to see.
They the ultra-Orthodox are the ones, the strictest of them, who will not stop their cars when the siren goes off on Memorial Day and on Holocaust Memorial Day. So there is definitely a line there, and there's a lot of tension there. This show was, I think, intended to try to resolve some of those issues in Israeli society, but it can only go so far.
Rabbi Hammerman.
Rivka, hi there.
Hi, Florida. 2 things. One is, I thought it was so interesting to see Lippy transform over the course of it. I thought his transformation.
Yeah.
That scene when he just falls down to the ground in the parking lot to pray for.
At the end.
Yeah, at the end,
Yeah.
it goes to you could see the evolution of his character. So even though he was not a good husband at the very beginning when he went off to at the very
South
end,
America, right?
South America, where it was. He feels like he redeemed himself.
Well, he did, and he was redeemed.
Yeah. So interesting.
But so here's the question. It was 1,000-to-1 shot that Ruchama would survive childbirth. That she would even survive to that point, even to try to have childbirth. 1,000-to-1. That was what her husband heard, from, and then found in the sources, and thought, well, maybe I can believe in 1,000-to-1. And then he, Lipa falls down in complete teshuvah, complete repentance. And it appears that both mother and child survive at the end. I'm just going to say it appears because we'll get into that. But there's a very religious side to this show that almost could be in a Hallmark Christmas movie. it almost appears too contrived. And I'm just wondering whether you buy into it or you want to believe these things so much that, you know, you let the show sort of lead us in that direction, even though real life, 1,000 to 1 are tough odds.
Yes, that part was not particularly believable, but I did want to believe it because it made everything together, you know.
I'd like to say,
and she was a star.
He was much more open-minded in general than his wife.
Yes, but you know, Gitti, Netta Riskin won the award, the version of the Emmy for the among all the actors on this show. She's the one who has been most decorated in Israel, and I think people, and I know Mara felt this way. You really like her, even though she's tough.
She's tough.
I mean, she lied to her kid about the girl that he wanted to marry and tried to get her away. It was like, and all this stuff at the beginning, she's lying and lying to protect her kids, but still, but you really feel for her. Evan, what do you want to say?
Number one, that I thought that was part of the rigidity, especially matching with a Sephardic family was not something that was going to work for her. But the 1 in 1,000, I think if we didn't get wrapped up in the percentages and the numbers, I thought it was very effective in that we all maybe get to a point in life where we have an absolute leap of faith that we must take. And the odds are against it. And whatever those odds are and whatever the circumstances are, I thought they portrayed that leap of faith very movingly. And I think that's why it was so effective, in that it was a pure leap of faith. And that's why I'd like to believe that everyone did make it.
Well, however it turned out, his transformation was real, and it was beautiful to watch. And you know, we should all feel that way on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And I look out and I don't see that as much. I don't see people falling on the ground saying, I can't believe what I've done in my life, and you know, I really need to change. I mean, it was amazing. So the question that then comes at the end, Ruchami, the very last scene, breaks the fourth wall. She looks into the camera. Everyone's been trying to figure out why. What does that mean? And the answers range from she really died, and or you know, whatever. And she's looking at us now, sort of like Our Town. You know, Emily is looking down from heaven and sort of looking at us.
I don't like that.
Everything ended up great. You know, she survived, and she's thankful for the show and sort of thanking the audience for watching it along with everyone, and just smiling and celebrating, because we're all celebrating that she lived. Which one do you prefer?
I like the lived one. But you know what really impressed me is that many of the characters, they were able to see the humanity in things. When they're supposed to get a divorce and the parents realize that these two kids really love each other and accepts that they're going to be together. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, I mentioned for a second before, shocking that there are like no Shabbat dinners.
Yeah.
That there's no real observance of Shabbat. So it gets back to what I think, David, what you were saying at the beginning, the difference, how they're similar to us and how they're different. And most secular Jews may not have that experience of Shabbat. That would be not off-putting, but alien, strange to see. Meanwhile, everything that you see of their religiosity is sort of the banality of the sacred. I think the term you can, touching the mezuzahs. Every time they pick up a glass of water, they say a bracha.
Right.
Every time Shulam says thank you, it's Yasher Koach.
Right.
There are so many Yasher Koach that I had to look up Yasher Koach to make sure I understood it right. It's an expression that's so out there in this world, and we use it on Shabbat, you know, but basically we don't say Yasher Koach, but it's a wonderful expression. I mean, you know, it means you should be strong, you should be strengthened. and you have strengthened me in a certain way. So it's a way of saying thank you, or I understand, I get it, I appreciate it. It's not just saying congratulations.
I also like the business with Sholem and his brother, where he wants to borrow money, and Sholem draws up this document, he signs it, and he gives it back to his brother. That was very, very touching.
You know, another thing is they do have this fear of God. God and their dead relatives are all watching over them. So they tend to be less, I can't say that they're better people, they're more ethical people, but they tend to be more aware of what they're doing when they're doing something wrong. And sometimes they don't care. And then tend to feel guiltier about it afterwards.
One thing that I wanted to mention, we were talking about it a little bit before, and it was really clear in Unforgiven, but it's the amount of, to call it peer pressure is understating it, but the amount of, we can't do this because what will the other members of the community think?
Yes.
You know, which is why the mother lies to her son, you know, and why they do all these things to, you know, not have a whiff of scandal. And the matchmaker is like, well, how can I, you know, match this one with that one after that one was known, or even after the sister was known, you know, and I think that they didn't stress that as much as reality really makes it be. And it's a very punitive and narrow aspect of that life.
Right.
And there is ostracism when Akiva broke off the first engagement in season 1. You know, and they knew it would be hard for him to find another wife, potentially. It's amazing, though, they never consider leaving the community. And in Israel, it may not be as hard as it is in other countries, like here in Rockland County. But there's a lot of ostracism. There's a lot of gossip. The whole thing about what happened to Lipa, you know, she wanted to keep it quiet, but people found out, one person found out, and she got really upset about that because they do want to maintain their reputations.
It was interesting, though. Lipa and his wife, what was her name? Gitti? The way they each dealt with their son's love interest, based on the marriage that they had and that they lived, she didn't take that into consideration. She only cared what the people would think with the first match. Well, I think he was more sensitive that his son should have a love match and not just what the community was setting up. Well, she didn't.
Right. You know, but I wanted to say that until, I don't know how many years ago, maybe more than 10, in our society, people cared much more what others thought, and there was a lot of pressure about that. But now we're so open, we accept anything, you know. You can murder someone and it's okay.
I wouldn't go that far.
All right, you know what I mean. So, you know, divorce, all kinds of things. We're not.
I think that's a good thing. You know, certainly the inclusiveness of our society is something we want to cultivate. Being less judgmental. Yeah. But what you wonder is how many people are like, you know, Akiva, the artist. I mean, and Ruchami in the first season, you might remember she reads bedtime stories. She's a voracious reader. She sneaks books out of the library, and she reads Anna Karenina, to, you know, and like the grandmother who watches the soap operas and starts to say, you know, that one is a real mashugana. You know, it's they are interacting with the real world, and you just wonder how much of that is going on. I will say, of course, getting them into the army, it would be a big deal in Israel. But while they're 10% and they vote always, for whoever their rabbis tell them. That's another thing. They do what their rabbis tell them to. But the percentage in the Israeli electorate has not dramatically risen as you would expect if they're having that many kids. And there's a sense that a pretty significant percentage are opting out as they grow up, opting out of ultra-Orthodoxy. They're still fairly right-wing politically. There was a new Zionist party that started with the last election that is extremely problematic. It has the Kahanists in it, and they made it into the Knesset because Bibi sort of cultivated them. They're racist, they are homophobic, but not really running on as a religious party, although they call them religious Zionists. They got 6 seats maybe. A lot of those seats came out of Jewish Torah and Shas. So some of these ultra-Orthodox are sort of leaving, at least electorally, their fold and moving on to other Zionist parties. But also, you see it here in America too, where there's a growing segment of the community, people like Sholem Dean, who are leaving Orthodoxy. Of course, that Unorthodox was all about that on Netflix. So, I talked about the banality of holiness, the kissing mezuzahs, the blessings, the study. I think it gives us a warm feeling to know that Judaism can imbue our whole lives with holiness. And we need to find ways to bring that about, whether we do it through prayer, and we have a lot of people who join us for Minyan every day, or we could read David Daniel's daily haiku. So can you tell everyone how to get your haiku, get on your list? David, sorry.
Send me your email.
Okay.
Oh.
Basically.
Oh.
I'll put my email in the chat.
It brings a real sense of holiness, and his new book does too. This was not a paid plug, but I really wanted to mention it.
I understand that a lot of young men who are not destined to be Torah scholars are going into the army, and their parents are pleased because otherwise they were hanging out on street corners and doing God knows what.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a good thing.
But how do you account for so many who don't want to be vaccinated?
In Israel or here?
Well, here is what I know about.
Because in Israel, they've reached herd immunity.
Yeah.
There were concerns about the ultra-Orthodox community at first in terms of social distancing. They just weren't, they sort of live by their own rules, and you have to get their own leaders to get them to do things. I mean, even the disaster in Meron, Mount Meron a few weeks ago, was because the government is just afraid to supervise them. It's just, they want to keep their votes, so they don't want to antagonize them, which is not a good thing if it comes to safety and herd immunity especially. But they've all, at this point, most Israelis have been vaccinated. In Israel proper, not in the West Bank.
Rabbi, does the Hasidic community feel that this show is an accurate representation?
I think they tolerate it to the degree that they watch TV at all, or they, and they do have the internet. They have like a form of the internet that's cleansed. It's a kosher internet, but some of them get around that too, like in the nursing home. So I just love those scenes.
Is there a reason why they put in a comedic character, almost comedic, I guess, for Schluffen?
For Schluffen, I love that name. He's a sleepy guy.
Was good. Yeah.
It's the Anna Tefka look. It's like we have our little types. One really interesting character was this German non-Jew who was sort of like the Shabbos Goy. I don't know if you remember him. I think he's in the first season. This was the third season because Kiva was kicked out of his house. He was probably kicked out a few times. Or it might have been the first season. and he had no place to sleep. So he went to the Beis Midrash, the study hall.
Oh, yeah.
And that guy was there, and they bonded. It was such a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
But so I think, in terms of non-Jews, there's sort of other, but in Israel you don't see a lot of them anyway. You don't see Arabs in this show at all, although they live right next to each other in that part of Jerusalem. They live in the Geula section of Jerusalem, the Geula neighborhood. So yes.
You asked if we thought that there were other people like Akiva who were artistically inclined. And I wonder how, I don't think it would be that common and remain observant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think there are, for instance, that artist, the artist that Akiva,
the real one,
Ghost, that he did artwork for. You see these shops that sell and cater to tourists with really schlocky art. So the old prohibition against graven images really does not apply in a lot of cases. It's not strictly adhered to in Islamic society, much more so than in Jewish.
I wanted to jump into the TV set when they were when Shalom is destroying his canvas.
Oy. But it was a dream.
Oh, really?
I think it was a dream.
Oh, I feel so much better.
And he threw it all into the fire? Yeah, now you feel better. It's going to be like Dallas. Remember the whole season was a dream? They woke up, Bobby was in the shower, he was alive.
No, I think
no one shot JR.
I think you're absolutely right, because otherwise Akiva would have seen how his father destroyed his painting and been very upset.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing they're still on speaking terms.
It was interesting, the last painting, which was of his former wife, and he had flames like
around her.
That was like, that part was finished now.
Well, was that Racheli though? I think.
No, it wasn't Racheli. It was
his current wife.
It was Racheli.
I think it was.
It wasn't his current wife. I thought
it was Racheli.
Yeah, no, I think it was Racheli.
Oh, really?
But
it was the wife.
Yeah, I wondered about the flames though.
Yeah,
right.
Me too.
She could have been rising from whatever, like the phoenix, or she could have been going someplace else.
I sort of interpreted it as a commentary on her passion for life, for art, which showed that, what people were portraying as mental illness could be portrayed in a much more positive way as passion.
Yes.
On that subject, I thought that the scene between Racheli and Shulam was fascinating because this concept was completely lost on him. And her passion and her love was something that he could not comprehend. And I thought that intersection was so beautifully done throughout. And I'd like to think that Racheli was really in many ways perfect for Akiva, in that where her passion lied was his.
So and you're voting for Racheli over Libby and Elisheva?
Indeed, I have to say so, yes.
So of course, in next season, Tzvi Aryeh is going to come up and actually come out to Sholem. It's going to be like Tevye.
Well, Racheli helped support him.
Yeah, I think so.
Isn't it a beautiful scene when they're meeting with the welfare woman?
Oh,
and they're both ostensibly making up these stories about how they feel about each other. And of course, as the audience, we know that they're both telling the truth.
Yeah.
And that was a great scene.
The good news is that in Israel, people really do care for one another in a sense that we just cannot conceive of here. So one person's child is everyone's child. Like when I was in Jerusalem with my kids in a baby carriage, a double stroller, and someone walked across the street to tell me that they should have a sweater on. That's the good news. The bad news is the red tape is so terrible. There's no way they would have worked so quickly to resolve that situation, or even for it for the child to be taken. And then you wonder how anyone in a gan, in a kindergarten or the daycare, could allow a child to be taken by someone who wasn't the parent. It's just like,
well, they don't have the same rules as
no,
we do.
I don't think I think that was not realistic.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
You're absolutely right. That was not realistic.
Right.
That whole scene was not realistic, where where the worker comes in, the welfare worker comes in, and and the uncle jumps off the porch, and everything goes wrong. But it was a funny scene, but a little crazy. It was like, what can go wrong today?
Right.
Have I got Surus? So
bad.
So this has been a lot of fun. I'm glad we had a chance to debrief. And Carl wanted me to mention Sutton Foster Thursday night film club. Bring Me the Light with Sutton Foster at 7:00. Sounds good. Carl,
Okay.
are you still there?
Yeah,
Carl.
I'm still here. I just want to say it's going to be a film at the synagogue, and everybody's welcome to join. It's being put together by the Broadway and Film Club. So
it's not going to be zoomed?
No, it's real.
It's a real film that's going to be shown on screen at the synagogue.
Oh my. You mean I have to put clothes on and comb my hair?
Just a mask.
Sorry.
Can you repeat the name of the film?
Yeah, it's Bring Me to the Light. It's actually it's a concert with Sutton Foster and other Broadway stars that they performed, and it's the Broadway Film Club is putting it on for anybody interested in coming to the synagogue.
I think Barbara had the great post-pandemic question, which is, how do you stop your video when you're in real life face-to-face?
One last question, and I sort of touched on it, but want to hit it more directly. Where does God come into play in their lives? You have this sense of holiness. You're saying blessings all the time. You're touching mezuzahs. You have the payas. They're studying.
Right.
But they don't really talk about God. I mentioned that, not like Tevye. Do you think they have a very fatalistic view that everything is sort of, it'll be what it'll be? We just have to we have to do our traditions, and
God will take care of everything else.
Well,
but Shulam tries to influence everything.
He does.
He's not leaving it to fate
or to God.
Right.
Yeah, and by the way, he hit a child.
Yes.
In this season.
Yes.
We shouldn't overlook that. To their credit, it seems like Haredi society doesn't tolerate it unless you get a major donor.
Right.
Whatever, everything was all fine one episode later.
Right.
But he hit a child.
He lost it several times. He lost it with his son, with Kiva. He hit his son, and then he also had that fight with his brother. So he had a little violent sense to his nature.
Yeah, but a teacher hitting a student, just transcends all of those things in terms of what would be even remotely acceptable. Torah, in Proverbs, spare the rod, spoil a child, but it's apparently not allowed in Israel now, which was very nice to see on this show. Because there are all kinds of stories about rabbis, hitting kids in Hebrew schools, even in this country back in the 50s and whatever, rapping with the knuckles. Rosalie, were you ever hit? I hope not.
No, and I never hit a child either.
No,
that's tough.
Yeah.
You're tempted sometimes.
Yeah, but I'm more forgiving. So, he lost his temper.
He never apologized.
No.
He covered it up. He made all kinds of excuses.
It was videoed. That was the other thing. Someone had his phone on in the class. That was, that was just a trouble. But again, at least the show doesn't cover it up, even if he tried to. And it was a fireable offense.
Yeah.
So on that happy note, no, this was a lot of fun. We should have. I know we have our Broadway group and our movie group and whatever, but it's great to just do this kind of thing.
Well, it's such an exceptional program,
Right.
There's another good Israeli program on Netflix now. It's called When Heroes Fly.
Oh, well, that's with Akiva.
Yeah, Michael Loney plays in it, but he's got a minor role. It's a good show.
You see him without the payas.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Right.
He's adorable.
The Red Sea diving something, which is a true story.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, yeah.
That's a funny,
the diving resort.
sort of silly but funny movie. Yeah, there are a lot of good Israeli shows on. And more coming. So, and of course, the most Israeli show of all is Wonder Woman.
Oh, In Treatment is back.
Yeah, that is. But I don't think it's going to be Israeli.
Not Israeli anymore.
No, and it's an entirely different cast.
Yeah, right.
All right, so let's keep telling each other what to watch, giving clues. All right, so thank you, Debbie, Danielle.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you.
Thank you all. Have a good night. And if anyone wants to see this, there is a recording.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, my conflict this evening was canceled, but I didn't get the text that it was canceled. So I drove there.
Oh.
Back.
So I'm going to erase the recording now.
Right.
No, that's okay. I'm glad you could come aboard, Joan.
Yeah, thank you.
Denise asked if we could talk about Fauda sometime. I would love to.
Watch it.
Is there a new season coming up? Because it's been a little while.
We wish there's no report of it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I have a feeling they'll do that because that's very popular in Israel too. And the last one sort of predicted, it's like Homeland. Every time they did something in a season, it happened in the real world. So Gaza blowing up, it happened. All right, so let's talk about Fauda.
Okay.
Very much.
Right.
Nice to see everybody.
Take
Good night.
care. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.